Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Myron Belkind. I'm an adjunct professor at the George Washington University School of Media and Public Affairs, former international bureau chief with the Associated Press, and the 107th president of the National Press Club. The National Press Club is the world's leading professional organization for journalists, committed to our profession's future through our programming with events such as this, while fostering a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at press.org. On behalf of our members worldwide, I'd like to welcome our speaker and those of you attending today's event. Our table includes guests of our speaker as well as working journalists who are club members. And so if you hear applause in our audience, I note that members of the general public are attending, so it's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. You can follow the action on Twitter using the hashtag NPC Lunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have a question and answer period. I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table guests. I'd like each of you to stand briefly as your name is announced. From your right, Wesley Pippard, Director Emeritus of the Missouri Journalism Washington Program. Frederica Dunn, travel writer for the Jamestown Post-Journal in New York State. Michelle Vu, Assistant Managing Editor, The Christian Post. Doris Margolis, President, Editorial Associates, and co-organizer of today's luncheon. Candy Carson, co-author of 2 books with her husband, who is our guest speaker today, and co-founder of the Carson Scholars Fund. Donna Lainwald-Leger, reporter USA Today, former National Press Club president and vice chair of the Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, Mary Lou Donahue, president, artistically speaking, and organizer of today's event. Thank you so much, Mary Lou. Kelly Wright, anchor reporter, Fox News. Megan Pointsky, regional homepage editor, The Washington Post. And Kirby Wilbur, executive director of the National Journalism Center. Although well known in his field, he was a pediatric brain surgeon at Johns Hopkins University. Benjamin Carson was not on the political radar until his keynote speech at last year's National Prayer Breakfast. With President Obama also on the dais, Dr. Carson spoke about the dangers facing the country: lack of education, the tax system, health care. He proposed a personal health savings account for everyone, an approach quite different from the Affordable Care Act. Some viewed the speech as a rebuke of the president. It caught the eye of conservatives and led Dr. Carson to the national stage and a weekly column in the Washington Times. And now, some are encouraging him to run for the Republican presidential nomination. While his views on social issues fit comfortably in the GOP's right wing, he also advocates pragmatism. Note the following from his column last week, and I quote, "If conservatives are going to win in 2014 and 2016 and preserve the environment of freedom to which we have grown accustomed, it will be necessary to learn how to prioritize issues. I'm not saying that social issues are not important, but if the executive branch remains in the hands of those with secular progressive ideas in 2016 and 2 or 3 more Supreme Court justices with similar leanings are appointed, conservative social ideas will become anathema to the prevailing powers, who will use every tool available to them to silence such opposition," unquote. Born into poverty and raised in inner city Detroit, Dr. Carson graduated from high school with honors, received a degree in psychology from Yale, and earned a medical degree at the University of Michigan. At age 33, Dr. Carson became the youngest doctor ever to head a major division at Johns Hopkins Hospital. He's the author of several books, and with his wife, the creator of a scholarship program for children in grades 4 to 11. Dr. Carson's prayer breakfast speech formed the backbone of his newest book, One Nation, What We Can All Do to Save America's Future, a topic he will address today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome to the National Press Club for Dr. Benjamin Carson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Candy and I are absolutely honored to be here. And I'm going to tell you at the end of the talk why I think the press is so important and what their role is in a free society. But first of all, let me just tell you that, I am just so grateful that I was born in this country, which is still a land of dreams. And my dream as a youngster was to be a doctor. I loved anything that had to do with medicine. Dr. Kildare, Dr. Casey, all that stuff. Man, I just couldn't get enough of that. And I even liked going to the doctor's office. So it tells you that I was a bit of a strange kid. But, there were a lot of problems along the way. My parents got divorced early on. My mother discovered that the man she had married when she was 13 years old was a bigamist. And, that resulted in a divorce. She only had a third-grade education. And the job of raising two young sons all by herself in the inner city. But the key thing about my mother, and the thing that she passed on to us that I think was so important, is she refused to be a victim. And she refused to allow us to be victims. And, she just said, whatever the situation is, I will deal with it. And that's what she told us to do. And there wasn't enough money ever. She would get in the car, take us out in the country on a Sunday morning, knock on a farmer's door, say, can we pick 4 bushels of your corn or apples or beans? 3 for you and 1 for us? They always liked that deal. And then she would bring the stuff home and can it. She would go to the Goodwill and get a pair of pants with a big hole in the knee and buy 2 patches and put it on there. And people would be saying, where'd you get those pants? I need some like that. And she would stretch every penny, every nickel, every dime, save everything, drive a car until it would not make a noise again. And then she would take all of those nickels and dimes and go out and buy a new car. And people would be saying, how could that woman afford a new car? What is she doing? She must be selling drugs or selling her body or something. But, she was just thrifty. She understood economics. In fact, I'm certain that if she were Secretary of Treasury, we would not be in a deficit situation right now. But, fortunately, I was able to benefit from her wisdom because she worked as a domestic, cleaning other people's houses, leaving at 5 in the morning, getting back after midnight, day after day. She worked so hard because she didn't want to be on welfare. She noticed that anybody who went on welfare generally did not come off of it. And she occasionally had to accept food stamps, but it was rare. And she just felt that she needed to be an independent soul. And I was a horrible student, and she was the one that made me start reading books, and my brother also. And I must say, I didn't like the idea. She came home and turned the TV off one day and said, you guys are going to read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Library and submit to me written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And, she would put check marks and highlights and everything on them, but we thought she was reading. But there I was stuck in the house reading books. Everybody else was having a great deal of fun, and I just hated it. And some people say, well, why did you do it? Your mother wasn't there. She was out working. She would have known if you didn't do it. And back in those days, you had to do what your parents told you. You know, there was no social psychologist saying, let the kid express themselves. So, you know, you just had to do what you were supposed to do. But as I started reading those books, an interesting thing occurred. You know, I really had a transformation of who I was. I started reading about people of great accomplishment. And I began to understand who it was that was responsible for my life. And it was me, not somebody else, not the environment, not some circumstance. And I used to hate poverty before that, but as I read more and more about people, poverty didn't bother me anymore because I knew I could change it. I knew it was within my own power to change it. And I developed the can-do attitude that really has had a profound effect on my entire career. And if I had listened to so many people, so many aspects of my neurosurgical career, I would not be standing here talking to you today. And I encourage people, particularly young people, to utilize those intellectual gifts and to think in a creative manner and think about what you can do, not what you can't do. There's so many negative people that you encounter. When I was in my first year of medical school, I did poorly on the first set of comprehensive exams. I was sent to see my counselor. He looked at my record. He said, "You seem like a very intelligent young man. Bet there are a lot of things you could do outside of medicine." He tried to convince me to drop out of medical school. He said, "You're not cut out for medicine. And you're just going to make yourself and everybody else miserable, and we can help you get into another discipline." Seemed like a very kind thing, but it wasn't. And, I just went back to my apartment, and I started contemplating. I said, "Lord, help me figure this out." And I said, what kind of courses do you struggle in? What kind of courses you do very well in? And I realized that I did well in courses where I did a lot of reading, and I struggled in courses where I listened to a lot of boring lectures. Because I don't get anything out of boring lectures. And there was 6 to 8 hours a day listening to boring lectures. So I made an executive decision to skip the boring lectures and to spend that time reading. And the rest of medical school was a snap after that. And I remember going back to my medical school some years later as the commencement speaker. And I was looking for that counselor because I was going to tell him he wasn't cut out to be a counselor. Because, there are so many people who are just negative. They can always tell you what's wrong with something and why something can't be done. And that is such a big problem in our society today. I must make a disclaimer, and that disclaimer is that I am not politically correct. And I don't like political correctness. And I totally refuse to submit to political correctness. And I actually derive a great deal of pleasure watching, the left wing as they, try to dissect everything I say, and Nazi? Did he say Nazi? He didn't say Nazi. No, he did not. Which I did say it. I said, in a very appropriate context, I said most of those people in Nazi Germany did not believe in what Hitler was doing. But did they open their mouths? No. And what happened? And what does happen when people don't open their mouths and when they don't stand up for what they believe in? Because freedom is not free. And nevertheless, I just find it so amusing. The other day I said that the VA scandal was a gift from God. And of course, any thinking person knows that what I'm saying is that the revelation of what happens when you create layers and layers of bureaucrats between people creates this kind of problem. And it's a good thing that something happened that will show even the most partisan person what to expect when you take health care and put it in the hands of the government. But of course, the left wing says, Carson says God wants veterans to die. I mean, it would be comical if it weren't so sad. That's where our nation has gone. It's like we have a bunch of grown-up third graders. You know, they just call people names, trying to divide people. And this is what I see as one of the biggest problems in our society today. You know, the reason that Candy and I wrote One Nation is to illustrate to people that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. The enemies are those people who are trying to drive a wedge in every little crack they can find to create, you know, racial wars, gender wars, income wars, age wars, any kind of war that you can present. Those guys are against you. They're keeping you from whatever. And it's so silly, but this stuff is straight out of the neo-Marxist literature. Saul Alinsky's, one of his rules for radicals, don't have a conversation. You know, and political correctness is the key way to keep people from having a conversation. Throws this blanket over your conversation. You can't say that. You can't talk about that. You can't think that. Says who? Isn't this still America? It was the last time I looked. And what we really need to start doing, all of us, when you're watching the news or you're reading a newspaper or magazine, get a piece of paper out and write on the top of it, and so that you can put little check marks under it, objective journalism on one column, smear campaign on the other side, and just listen to it and check it off. And what you will find is that there are certain columnists, certain pundits, who never actually address the real issue at hand. They go off on some tangent. They start calling people names. They start trying to demonize folks. And you never quite get to the actual issue at hand. And it's one of the reasons that it's so important that our populace become educated again. They become informed again. The founders of our nation said our freedom and our system of government is based upon a well-informed and educated populace. And if they ever become anything other than that, the nature of the country will change. Why? Because people would not have the wherewithal to analyze what they're hearing. And they could be very easily led, just like sheep to the slaughter, by slick politicians and dishonest media. This is what we are dealing with. This is what is in the process of destroying our nation. Now, I know what the left wing... I know what the left wing will say. They will say, Carson said the American people are too stupid to know anything, because that's the only way that they know how to report. They don't actually know how to report the right kinds of things. But I think we have to start calling them out on all of this silliness. And I think it is so important that we hold the press to a higher standard. They can't do what they do. Because a free and vibrant society is dependent upon a free press. And when I say a free press, I'm talking about a press that is free to tell the truth, to be objective, and not to choose sides. Because when the press chooses sides, they give license to the side that they chose to ignore the law, to ignore the Constitution, to do anything they want and not be called into question for it. And when that happens, the freedoms in a society disappear. That is a law of the press. You can go back throughout history and read about it. And at some point, members of the press, just like members of political parties, have to stop and say, you know what? My loyalty is not to this party or that party. My loyalty is to America. That's what's going to make the difference. And we have to stop making issues into partisan issues. I mean, look at our national debt. $17.5 trillion moving rapidly toward $18 trillion. Do you know how much money that is? If you tried to pay that back at $1 billion a day, I mean, that's a lot of money, $1 billion? It would take you 47 years. You know, I mean, that's a ridiculous amount. And the only reason we can do it is because our dollar is the reserve currency of the world. What if it wasn't? And it may not be forever, because that's a status that usually goes to the number one economic power in the world, which we have been since the 1870s and will not be by the end of this year because of our incredibly sluggish growth. And why do we have such sluggish growth? Because we have asinine economic policies. You know, you think about this. Think about this. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And we sit here and we complain about companies doing business overseas. That indicates a fundamental lack of understanding of what capitalism is. People don't go into business to support the government. They go into business to make money. So a wise government creates an environment that is conducive to business, not one that drives it out and then blames them and demonizes them. That doesn't make any sense. A wise government has a tax structure that is truly fair, not one that oppresses people. And I will soon be coming out with some principles of taxation. One of which is no American should have to pay more than 37% of what they earn in taxes. And I'm talking about all taxes. You know, I'm talking about federal, state, local, all taxes, 37%. That's more than a third of what you make. I think that's reasonable. Now, we can make it 42% for those who make over $1 million, just so that the left wing can be satisfied that somebody's getting messed up. But, you know, but I mean, anybody who's paying more than 50% of what they make in all taxes, that disincentivizes people. And what we need to recognize is when you incentivize people and you get people working hard and you get people creating businesses, it creates a much bigger pot. In fact, the government will wind up with a lot more money, not with less money. But we have to get people who understand that, not people who think that you take the money from this group, and if you give it to this group, then that will be fair. And by the way, this group doesn't even pay any federal income tax, but they should have a say in how much this group pays. How does that sound fair? That's not fair at all. Proportionality, that's what's fair. You know, you make a lot, you pay a lot. You make a little, you pay a little. You know, you make $10 billion, you pay $1 billion. You make $10, you pay $1. But the wonderful thing about our nation is, in a system like that, the guy who paid $1 billion and the guy who paid $1 have the same rights. That's what America is about. We're not about dividing people up and creating class envy. In fact, if you go back and you look at the neo-Marxist literature, what do they say? What do they emphasize? The importance of class envy, that you can never let it rest. Have you noticed anybody who does that in our society? I'm not mentioning any names, but I'm telling you, it's rampant. And this is what we've got to stop. And we've got to become compassionate. And when I talk about compassionate, we have to think about the next generation. I grew up in Detroit, so I'm very sensitive to this. Detroit was once the wealthiest city in America, and now it's the largest bankruptcy. And what happened? People kept kicking the can down the road. They refused to accept responsibility for what was going on. Some people say it was the unions, and that, yes, they played a big role in it, but unions do what unions do. I mean, they will gladly strangle the goose that laid the golden egg. Just give me that egg right now. I don't care about anything else in the future. But the big three automakers had very smart executives. And I blame them just as much because they knew that if they kept conceding to the demands of the unions, that one day the price would have to be paid. But they also knew that by that time, they would have long disappeared in their golden parachutes, and it would not be their problem. And this is exactly what we are doing today in this nation. We have no regard whatsoever for the people who come behind us. We just want ours right now. It is incredibly selfish. It is un-American, and we have to stop it. We just can't do it. And why do I rail so much against the Affordable Care Act? Well, I wouldn't rail against it if it was the Affordable Care Act. But it's the Unaffordable Care Act. You know, the fact of the matter, the real reason, it's not because of the rollout and all the computer glitches and the prevarications that surrounded it being passed. It's not about the increasing premiums and the inefficiency in the bureaucracy. It's about the fact that we are taking the most important thing that a person has, their health and their health care, and we're putting it under the hands of bureaucrats in government. How can you give away your most important asset to the government? Because if they can control your most important asset, it is not long before they can control everything else. And I want you to go and read what Saul Alinsky and what Vladimir Lenin said about that. I mean, I think people need to educate themselves so that you know what's going on, so that you know what the agenda is, so that you know how to combat it. You won't know that if you don't educate yourself in terms of what's going on in our society. And I think it's also incredibly important that when we gain control again, and when I say we, I'm not talking about any particular political party. I'm talking about people with common sense. When we gain control again, what we have to remember is that we are not going to treat the secular progressives the way that they treated us. We are going to govern based on the Constitution of the United States of America. And we're not going to have special favors. We're going to have only one special interest group, and that's the American people. And I'm talking about all of the American people. The downtrodden in our country have been abused so much over the last several decades by so-called do-gooders who have made them into a dependent class. We don't want a dependent class. We want everybody. We want the 47% to ascend to the highest levels possible. We have to put the right programs in place. We have to look at things like what Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize for his theory on microeconomics and has lifted millions of people out of poverty in Pakistan and India. Those things will work right here in America. We are responsible for putting those things together because all of us, no matter what our socioeconomic class and status, we're all in the same boat. And if part of the boat sinks, the rest of it's going down too. And we have to recognize that that is the reason that we are called the United States of America. Thank you.
Okay, we want to begin the questions. Please be seated so we want to use every minute possible to ask Dr. Carson questions and to hear his responses. Dr. Carson, were you surprised by the attention you received following the 2013 National Prayer Breakfast? Why do you think you struck such a chord?
Yeah, I didn't expect it to be quite to that level. I knew something special was going to happen when I was asked to do it, because I had spoken 16 years earlier at the prayer breakfast when President Clinton was there. And I didn't think anybody ever did it twice, and I asked, and they said, one person has, and that's Billy Graham. Well, I knew I was in pretty good company, and I figured the good Lord had something he wanted me to say. And I didn't know what it was until the morning of the prayer breakfast. And I knew it struck a chord, but I didn't expect it to be so deep and abiding. And what has happened is that all of those people who have given up on America are starting to think that maybe they're not the only ones who feel that way. Maybe there is some logic and some common sense. Maybe there is hope. And that's what I represent to a lot of people. I think there are a lot of people who could represent that same thing. And I'm very much hoping that one of those people will come along soon. And, who really understands the Constitution, who understands freedom, what true freedom is all about, who understands how to empower people, who understands economics and the importance of taking the heavy foot of government off the neck of business and industry, and who understands that this is, in fact, a Judeo-Christian nation with real values.
Political pundits have defined you as a conservative, particularly following the prayer breakfast. How would you define yourself politically?
That's easy. I would consider myself logical. And, as far as I'm concerned, common sense should be in both parties. That's why it's called common sense. So, you look at something that has been politicized, like Benghazi. Now, what's the big issue there? The big issue, as far as I'm concerned, is that we are telling our troops that if you get into a difficult situation, you're on your own. We're not coming to help you. Even though we have always had your back, we no longer have your back if you get in trouble. And we're also saying that, we don't care if we put you in a place where we can't protect you. These are horrible messages. These are not partisan messages. These are something that should outrage every one of us. Every one of us should want to get to the bottom of that. But you have one group saying, no, we've asked all the questions. It's okay, forget about it. How did we get to that place in our nation? So because I want to know the answers to that, because I want to know the answers to what happened with the IRS, abuse of government, which affects everybody, I don't think that necessarily makes me a conservative. I think that makes me an American who understands America and what freedom really is.
If this is, as you just said, a Judeo-Christian country, how would you govern to include those who are not Jewish or Christian?
The same way that we always have. Everybody's free to do whatever they want to do. And to try to impose one's religious beliefs upon someone else is absolutely not what we should be doing. But we also need to understand that that goes in both directions. And, someone who is an atheist doesn't have a right to tell somebody who isn't an atheist what they can or cannot do or what they can or cannot say. So we have to be fair, but it has to be fair in both directions.
Are you now registered with any of the political national parties? If not, will you?
I am and have been for many years a registered independent. I have experienced both parties. I have been a Democrat, quite a flaming liberal Democrat. And I have been a Republican, quite a very conservative Republican. And now I'm an independent. I have voted for people in all different parties. In fact, I don't really even like the party system. I would be in favor of a new law that says people's party affiliation cannot be on the ballot. And therefore, you would actually have to know who the person was and what you were voting for. That would make a big difference.
Politics in this country is terribly polarized. Is there room for someone who won't toe the line for either party?
I think we have to make room. You know, we have to remember, and this is so essential if our nation is to survive as the pinnacle nation of the world, that we are Americans first. Not that we are Democrats, not that we are Republicans, not that we are independents. This is destroying us. A wise man by the name of Jesus Christ once said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." It never has stood. It never will stand. We are an exceptional nation. There are some people who try to make you believe that we're not. But just think about all of those people who preceded you. Think about the Nathan Hales of the world, a teenage rebel, spy, caught, ready to be executed. He says, "My only regret is that I have but one life to give for my nation." Think about all of those troops stepping over their dead comrades at Normandy, being mowed down by the hundreds, not fearing for themselves, but fighting for you, changing the course of the world. Those are the people who preceded us, who cared about us. And the question is, do we care about those who are coming after us? And if we do, we have to manifest the same kind of courage.
You are sometimes described as a Tea Party favorite, but is there a formal organization that can be defined as a Tea Party? What does it mean to be a Tea Party favorite?
Well, I hope it means being a favorite of ordinary Americans who feel that they have a right to say of what goes on in their country. And the reason that they've been demonized by so many is because there has formed an elite group who feels that they are the ones who get to say what everybody else does, and that this is a country that is for, of, and by the government. The Tea Party is saying, no, 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 it's for, of, and by the people. And they're not a formal, organized group. They're you, me, anybody who cares about freedom in this nation. We love to label people, but they're just ordinary Americans who want to have a say.
From where do you expect to draw the most support?
Honestly, I don't care. And I'm serious. As long as I have the support of God, that's what matters to me. I think that one of the reasons that this nation rose to the pinnacle of the world so fast, faster than anybody in the history of the world, is because we live by godly principles of loving your fellow man, of caring about your neighbor, of developing your God-given talents to the utmost so that you become valuable to the people around you, of having values and principles that govern your life. And if we can regain that, then we truly will have one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What steps have you taken toward a presidential run in 2016?
I have taken no steps toward such a thing. And I got to tell you, I do not wish that job upon anybody, including myself. Have you noticed how people age when they get into that thing? I mean, after a long and arduous career of neurosurgery, I was looking forward to learning how to play the organ and playing golf and learning new languages. I bought all these Rosetta Stones, you know. But it appears to me that perhaps God has a different plan for me. And you know, I don't okay. I don't know what those plans are. Right now, it's to continue to go around trying to wake our nation up and help the people to realize that our strength is in our unity. And we need to stop fighting each other. And we need to pool our collective resources. We have a lot of intellect, and we're very innovative people. And if we just stop this my way or the highway stuff and work together, we really can be an effective force. And we need to recognize that if we go off the world scene as the pinnacle nation, we will be replaced by somebody else. And the likelihood that they will be as benign as we are is extremely unlikely. And just go back and read your history books about what the world was like before we became the pinnacle power.
You say you are concerned about partisan politics gumming up the governing process. Your views seem very much to the right. Can you cite any example of liberal or progressive views you support?
I can cite many evidences of common sense things that I advocate, and that's what I advocate. I don't advocate for what's conservative or for what's liberal. I advocate for what makes sense, and what makes sense for our entire nation. Now, if that tends to be looked at as conservative, and maybe people should note that in their own lives.
A few medical-related or healthcare-related questions. You've been highly critical of Obamacare. How would you fix the healthcare system in this country?
I'm glad you asked that question. Key thing for me is to make sure that the most important thing you have, your health care, is in your own hands. So there are a number of ways that I would fix it. But the linchpin is health savings accounts, because you have control of that yourself. We have a number of different ways that they can be funded. Bear in mind, we already spend more than twice as much per capita on health care in this nation as the next closest nation in the world. So it's not a matter of putting resources in it, it's a matter of using them the right way. Give everybody a health savings account the day they are born, and they keep it until the day they die. And you have control over that. You sprain your ankle, you need an x-ray, comes out of your HSA. You need a physical exam for a new job, HSA. Birth control pills, HSA, no Hobby Lobby issues. And, very few things are coming out of your catastrophic or bridge insurance. The cost of that will plummet. You make it cumulative. In other words, if you don't use it, you don't lose it. It keeps accumulating. Since you have it from the time of birth, and it's accumulating each year, and the vast majority of people aren't using substantial amounts of it well into adulthood, they're accumulating enormous amounts of money. The other kicker is you allow people to shift money within their health savings account within their family. So say the father is $500 short, the mother can give $500 out of hers, or the son, or the grandmother, or anybody in the family. Every family becomes its own insurance company with no middleman. Incredible amount of flexibility. Very few things aren't going to be handled that way. And, there are other aspects of it. American Legacy PAC, just go to that website and you can read all about it. More things are coming out each week. And I've been trying to encourage Congress that they need to start looking at some alternatives, because the fact of the matter is, anybody who knows much about economics knows that the current system that is law now, I will admit, is unsustainable. It just won't work. So what will eventually happen after it collapses is people will say, well, let's just have a single-payer system. But we are being proactive. We're coming out with things that everybody will be able to understand and will be able to see for themselves. All the numbers are being worked out, that it's much less expensive, gives you control, and when you control it, then it brings the whole medical system into the free market. That's how you control costs. That's how you control quality.
Dr. Carson, do you think the Obama administration is handling the VA crisis seriously enough? Why or why not?
No. I think that any type of system that places a large number of bureaucrats between the people and their care is a bad system. Did they mean well? Yes. Have I worked in VA facilities? Yes. Are there many wonderful people there who've dedicated their lives to taking care of our veterans? Absolutely. But there's a lot of bureaucracy there. And it needs to be fixed. And people need to be held accountable. That's one of the problems that I have with this administration. You have to hold people accountable. In the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, it says, if a ruler hearken to lies, all his servants are wicked. And basically what that means, if you don't hold people accountable, people will observe that. And pretty soon they'll say, well, I can get away with that too, and I can do this. So yes, there needs to be accountability. And as long as I'm talking about accountability, it's hard to have accountability when you have a government that is so large that nobody can even comprehend where all the problems are. It tells us that we need to reduce the government. I talk in the book about how to do that in a compassionate way by attrition. We have thousands of government workers that retire every year. Let them go. And if we need more workers in that particular area, we can shift somebody from another area. Within 5 years, you've got a lean and trim and efficient government. We have to, create efficiencies as we go. But these are not difficult things to do, and they're not things that have to be mean to anybody. Again, we use our collective intellect, our collective common sense, and start thinking about how we improve ourselves, how we improve our government, and stop pointing fingers at each other. You'll notice that I never say horrible things about the president. I may say horrible things about his policies, but I don't say horrible things about him or about anybody for that fact, because why get in the mud and act like third graders when we have such big problems to solve?
Why did you decide to retire as a neurosurgeon, a very successful one? Are there other doctors out there who can do or want to do what you did?
Well, it's very simple. Somebody told me that neurosurgeons die early. And I didn't believe it, so I wrote down the name of the last 10 neurosurgeons I knew who died, calculated the average age of death, and it was 61. So I said, if I'm still alive, I will retire when I'm 61, and I did.
Can you give us more details about the Carson Scholars Fund and the recipients of the money from that fund?
Well, Candy and I noticed many years ago when we would go into schools, we would see all these trophies. All-state basketball, all-state wrestling, all-state this, that, and the other. Quarterback was the big man on campus. What about the academic superstar? What did they get? A little National Honor Society pen? Pat on the head, their little nerd, Nobody really cared that much about them. And at the same time, we were aware of a survey, international survey, looking at the ability of 8th grade equivalents to solve so-called complex math and science problems. And we came in number 21 out of 22. Well, that was really quite alarming. So we said, we got to do something about this. So we started giving out scholar awards to children starting in the 4th grade, from the 4th to the 11th grade, from all backgrounds, who achieved at the highest academic levels and demonstrated humanitarian qualities. that they cared about other people, because we're trying to develop the future leaders. We need people who are not just smart, but people who actually care about others. And in 1996, we started with 25 scholars, and now we've given out over 6,200 scholars in all 50 states. And we also have a reading room component to it. We put reading rooms all over the country. And they're fascinating places that no little kid would pass up. We put them in all kinds of places, but we particularly target Title I schools, where a lot of kids come from homes with no books. They go to a school with no library. Those are the ones who drop out, to their detriment and to the detriment of society. So they get points for the amount of time they spend in these reading rooms, which are decorated, just incredibly fancy places. Talk to my wife about it afterwards. She goes to almost all the reading room openings all over the country. And they get points, and they can trade them in for prizes. And in the beginning, they do it for the prizes, but it doesn't take long before that shows up in their academic performance. And if you get a kid to the point where he enjoys reading, the likelihood of him dropping out is almost zero. And these are the kinds of things that we need to start thinking about. Anybody wants to get involved, carsonscholars.org. Thank you.
You have, turning to another subject, you have said some weapons should be banned, but you've also said that the Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear arms. Can you explain in more detail how you feel about guns, and what do you think this country's gun policy should be?
Once again, I'm glad you asked that question. I think there's some weapons that probably are not appropriate, like, tanks. And I'm not sure that people should have a rocket launcher in their bedroom. But, conventional weapons, I don't have any problem with. The Second Amendment is an essential part of our Constitution. It's there for a reason, because it would give the populace the ability to assist the military in case of a foreign invasion. But more importantly, it's there because if we ever have a rogue government that wants to dominate the people will have the ability to defend themselves. We must always protect that right. However, what I have said, which some people have misinterpreted, is that in places where there's a lot of crime with assault weapons, that keeping the Second Amendment on the table and always protecting it, we should be able to engage in conversations about it. What can we agree on that doesn't violate the Second Amendment, but that provides some degree of protection for our citizens? Unless we can talk about these kinds of things, we will never succeed with these kinds of things. And one of the things that I have been somewhat critical, particularly conservatives, is they sometimes have these litmus tests. And they say, the person has to believe this, and I just can't deal with them. Otherwise, I'm taking my marbles and I'm going home. That is such an infantile attitude. And what people have to realize is sometimes you have to be able to prioritize. I think about the story of Esther in the Bible. She was Jewish. She sort of kept that hidden, and she ended up, marrying the king of the group that was oppressing her people. And there were some people who knew that she was Jewish, and they thought that was horrible. How could she subjugate, her values and principles like that? But she had a bigger picture in mind, and because of her position as queen, she was able to save all of her people. And we have to understand that concept, be it guns, be it abortion, be it any number of things. People have to be in position, the right people who have common sense, people who value life, people who value freedom. But if they're never in position, they will never be able to do anything about those things.
We are almost out of time, but before asking the last question, we have a couple of housekeeping matters to take care of. First of all, I'd like to remind you about our upcoming events and speakers. On June 11th, we will have Hollywood writer-director M. Night Shyamalan, who will discuss his off-screen campaign to close America's education achievement gap. And on August 1, and we will have some other speakers in the interim, but on August 1, we have confirmation that we will have the President of the Republic of Congo, Denis Sassou Nguesso, who will discuss peace, security, and stability of the Central African region and oil investments in his country. Now I'd like to present we'd like to present our guest with the traditional National Press Club mug, and Dr. Carson. If you make multiple visits, you get multiple cups, and maybe there'll be an occasion for that.
Thank you very much.
Our final question, what is your favorite book that is not the Bible or one of your own books?
I'm going to tickle you with this. It was the first book that I ever read. It was called Chip the Dam Builder. It was about a beaver. It was really what started me on my journey of reading. I mean, this beaver was so wise. And he made those birch barks seem so tasty. I wanted to eat one myself. But it really sort of got my imagination stimulated. And I read every animal book in the public library. Then I went to the downtown branch. I read all the animal books. Then I started reading about plants. And then I started reading about rocks because we live near the railroad tracks. And what is there along the railroad tracks? Rocks. And pretty soon I could identify any rock, tell you how it was formed, where it came from. Still in the 5th grade at that time, I was the dummy. That's what they call me. But one day the teacher came in. He held up a big black shiny rock. He says, "Can anybody tell me what this is?" Well, I never raised my hand. So I waited for one of the smart kids to raise their hand. Nobody did. I waited for one of the dumb kids to raise their hand. Nobody. So I raised my hand. Everybody turned around and they looked. They couldn't believe Carson's got his hand up. This is going to be good. And the teacher called on me. And I said, "Mr. Jake, that's obsidian." There was silence in the room because it sounded good. Nobody knew what was right around. And he said, "That's right, it is obsidian." I said, "Obsidian is formed after volcanic eruption, and the lava flows down and hits the water. It's a supercooling process. The elements coalesce, the elements force." Everybody was staring at me. And, but I was the most amazed person in the room because it dawned on me at that moment that I was no dummy. And that the reason I knew those answers is because I was reading those books. And from that point forward, you couldn't get a book out of my hand. My mother would say, "Benjamin, put the book down and eat your food." It didn't matter, and it completely transformed my life. And that's the reason that we're so passionate about getting our young people to read now and to value education, because that is what will save our nation. Thank you.
We're running out of time. I'd like to remind everybody to remain seated so that we can get Dr. Carson to the Holman Lounge, where he will be pleased to sign copies of his new book, co-authored with his wife. And there are still copies available outside in the ballroom corridor. I'd also like to thank National Press Club staff, including its Journalism Institute and Broadcast Center, for organizing today's event. Also, if you'd like to get a copy of today's program or to get more information about the National Press Club, please check out our website at press.org. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you again, Dr. Carson. We're adjourned.